The Book of Leviticus, Chapter 9. Octave of the Ordination. On the 8th day Moses summoned Aaron and his sons together with the elders of Israel and said to Aaron, "Take a calf of the herd for a purification offering, and a ram for a burnt offering, both without blemish, and offer them before the Lord. Tell the Israelites too, take a he-goat for a purification offering, a calf." Sammy, don't mess with my blanket. "A calf and a lamb, both unblemished yearlings, for a burnt offering, and an ox and a ram for a communion sacrifice to sacrifice before the Lord, along with a grain offering mixed with oil, for today the Lord will appear to you." So they brought what Moses had ordered before the tent of meeting when the whole community had come forward and stood before the Lord. Moses said, "This is what the Lord orders you to do, that the glory of the Lord may appear to you. Approach the altar." Moses then told Aaron, "And make your purification offering and your burnt offering in atonement for yourself and for your household. Then make the offering of the people in atonement for them as the Lord has commanded." Approaching the altar, Aaron first slaughtered the calf of the purification offering. That was his own offering. When his sons presented the blood to him, he dipped his finger in the blood and put it on the horns of the altar. The rest of the blood he poured out at the base of the altar. He then burned on the altar the fat, the kidneys, and the lobe of the liver from the purification offering, as the Lord had commanded Moses, but the flesh and the hide he burned in the fire outside the camp. Then Aaron slaughtered the burnt offering. When his sons brought him the blood, he splashed it on all sides of the altar. They then brought him the pieces and the head of the burnt offering, and he burned them on the altar. Having washed the inner organs and the shanks, he burned those also with the burnt offering on the altar. Then he had the people's offering brought, taking the goat that was for the people's purification offering. He slaughtered it and offered it as a purification offering as before. Then he brought forward the burnt offering and offered it according to procedure. He then presented the grain offering. Taking a handful of it, he burned it on the altar in addition to the morning burnt offering. Finally, he slaughtered the ox and the ram, the communion sacrifice of the people. When his sons brought him the blood, Aaron splashed it on all sides of the altar. The portions of fat from the ox and from the ram, the fatty tail, the covering fat, the kidneys, and the lobe of the liver, they placed on top of the briskets. Aaron burned the fat pieces on the altar, but the briskets and the right thigh he raised as he elevated offering before the Lord. As the Lord had commanded Moses, revelation of the Lord's glory, Aaron then raised his hands over the people and blessed them. When he came down from offering the purification offering, the burnt offering, and the communion offering, Moses and Aaron went into the tent of meeting. On coming out, they blessed the people. Then the glory of the Lord appeared to all the people. Fire came forth from the Lord's presence and consumed the burnt offering and the fat on the altar. Seeing this, all the people shouted with joy and fell prostrate. Leviticus chapter 10. Nadab and Abihu. Aaron's sons, Nadab and Abihu, took their censers, and putting incense on the fire they set in them, they offered before the Lord unauthorized fire such as he had not commanded. Fire therefore came forth from the Lord's presence and consumed them. So they that died in the Lord's presence, Moses then said to Aaron, "This is as the Lord said. Through those near to me I will be sanctified. In the sight of all the people I will obtain glory." But Aaron said nothing. Then Moses summoned Michael and Elzaphan, the sons of Aaron's uncle Uzziel, with the order, "Come, carry your kinsmen from before the sanctuary to a place outside the camp." So they drew near and carried them by means of their tunics outside the camp, as Moses had commanded. Conduct of the priests. Moses said to Aaron and his sons, Eleazar and Ithamar, "Do not dishevel your hair or tear your garments, lest you die and bring God's wrath also on the whole community. While your kindred, the rest of the house of Israel, may mourn for those whom the Lord's fire has burned up, you shall not go beyond the entrance of the tent of meeting, else you shall die. For the anointing oil of the Lord is upon you." So they did as Moses told them. The Lord said to Aaron, "When you are to go to the tent of meeting, you and your sons are forbidden, for a perpetual statute, throughout your generations to drink any wine or strong drink, lest you die. You must be able to distinguish between what is sacred and what is profane, and between what is clean and what is unclean. And you must be able to teach the Israelites all the statutes that the Lord has given them through Moses, the eating of the priestly portions. Moses said to Aaron and his surviving sons, Eleazar and Ithamar, take the grain offering left over from the oblations to the Lord and eat it beside the altar in the form of unleavened cakes. Since it is most holy, you must eat it in a sacred place, because it is your and your sons' due from the oblations to the Lord. Such is the command I have received. The brisket of the elevated offering and the leg of the contribution, however, you and your sons and daughters may eat in a clean place, for these have been assigned to you and your children as your due from the communion sacrifices of the Israelites. The leg of the contribution and the brisket of the elevated offering shall be brought in with the oblations of fat to be raised as an elevated offering before the Lord. They shall belong to you and your children as your due forever, as the Lord has commanded. Moses inquired closely about the goat of the purification offering and discovered that it had all been burned. So he was angry with the surviving sons of Aaron, Eleazar, and Ithamar, and said, why did you not eat the purification offering in the sacred place, since it is most holy? It has been given to you, and you might remove the guilt of the community and make atonement for them before the Lord. Since its blood was not brought inside the sanctuary, you should certainly have eaten the offering in the sanctuary, as I have commanded. Aaron answered Moses, even though they presented their purification offering and burnt offering before the Lord today, still this misfortune has befallen me. Had I then eaten of the purification offering today, would it have been pleasing to the Lord? On hearing this, Moses was satisfied. 3. Laws regarding ritual purity. Chapter 11, Levitcus. Clean and unclean meats. The Lord said to Moses and Aaron, speak to the Israelites and tell them, of all the land animals, these are the ones you may eat. Any animal that has hoofs you may eat, provided it is cloven-footed and chews the cud. But you shall not eat any of the following from among those that only chew the cud, or only have hoofs: the camel, which indeed chews the cud, but does not have hoofs, and is therefore unclean for you; the rock hyrax, which indeed chews the cud, but does not have hoofs, and is therefore unclean for you; the hare, which indeed chews the cud, but does not have hoofs, is therefore unclean for you; and the pig, which does indeed have hoofs, and is cloven-footed, but does not chew the cud, and is therefore unclean for you. You shall not eat their meat, and you shall not touch their carcasses; they are unclean for you. Of the various creatures that live in the water, you may eat the following: whatever in the seas or in the river waters that has both fins and scales you may eat. But of the creatures that swarm in the water, or of the animals that otherwise live in the water, whether in the sea or in the rivers, all those that lack either fins or scales are loathsome for you, and shall always be loathsome for you. Their meat you shall not eat, and their carcasses you shall loathe. Every water creature that lacks fins or scales is loathsome for you. Of the birds, these you shall loathe; they shall not be eaten, they are loathsome: the griffin vulture, the bearded vulture, the black vulture, the kites, the various species of falcons, the various species of crows, the eagle owl, the kestrel, the long-eared owl, the various species of hawks, the little owl, the cormorant, the screech owl, the barn owl, the horned owl, the osprey, the stork, the various species of herons, the hoopoe, and the bat. The various winged insects that walk on all fours are loathsome for you. But all the various winged insects that walk on all fours you may eat: those that have legs joined above their feet for leaping on the ground. Hence of these you may eat the following: the various kinds of locusts, the various kinds of bald locusts, the various kinds of crickets, and the various kinds of grasshoppers. All other winged insects, they have 4 legs, are loathsome for you. You become unclean by the following: anyone who touches their carcasses shall be unclean until evening, and anyone who carries any part of their carcasses shall wash his garments and be unclean until evening. By all hoofed animals that are not cloven-footed or do not chew the cud, they are unclean for you. Anyone who touches them becomes unclean. Also by the various quadrupeds that walk on paws, they are unclean for you. Anyone who touches their carcasses shall be unclean until evening, and anyone who carries their carcasses shall wash his garments and be unclean until evening. They are unclean for you. Of the creatures that swarm on the ground, the following are unclean for you: the rat, the mouse, the various kinds of lizards, the gecko, the spotted lizard, the agama, the skink, and the chameleon. Among the various swarming creatures, these are unclean for you. Everyone who touches them when they are dead shall be unclean until evening. Everything on which one of them falls when dead becomes unclean, including any article of wood, cloth, leather, or goat hair, any article of which use can be made. It must be immersed in water and remain unclean until evening, when it again becomes clean. Should any of these creatures fall into a clay vessel, everything in it becomes unclean, and the vessel itself you must break. Any food that can be eaten which makes contact with water, and any liquid that may be drank in any such vessel becomes unclean. Any object on which any part of their carcass falls becomes unclean. If it is an oven or a stove, this must be broken to pieces. They are unclean and shall always be unclean to you. However, a spring or a cistern for collecting water remains clean, but whoever touches such an animal's carcass becomes unclean. If any part of the carcass becomes unclean, if any part of their carcasses falls on any sort of grain that is to be sown, it remains clean. But if the grain has become moistened, it becomes unclean to you when any part of their carcass falls on it. When one of the animals that you could otherwise eat dies of itself, anyone who touches its carcass shall be unclean until evening. And anyone who eats any part of its carcass shall wash his garments and be unclean until evening. So also anyone who carries its carcass shall wash his garments and be unclean until evening. All the creatures that swarm on the ground are loathsome, and shall not be eaten, whether it crawls on its belly, goes on all fours, or has many legs. Any creature that swarms on the earth, you shall not eat them, they are loathsome. Do not make yourselves loathsome by any swarming creature, nor defile yourselves with them, and so become unclean by them. For I, the Lord, am your God. You shall make and keep yourselves holy, because I am holy. You shall not make yourselves unclean then by any swarming creature that crawls on the ground, since I, the Lord, am the one who brought you up from the land of Egypt, that I might be your God, and shall be holy, because I am holy. This is the instruction for land animals, birds, and all the creatures that move above in the water, as well as any animal that swarms on the ground, that you may distinguish between the clean and the unclean, and between creatures that may be eaten and those that may not be eaten. God bless you.